The stars were dying, and Counselor Thess knew his people had run out of time. He stood in what remained of the Grand Council chamber on Vela Prime, watching through the shattered crystal windows as another city burned in the distance. The Velen had never known war before. They were a peaceful species, tall and thin with silver skin that glowed softly in starlight. For 300 years, they had built a civilization of beauty and harmony across 7 worlds. Then the Ravagers arrived. Thess had seen the reports from the outer colonies. He had watched the recordings until his mind couldn't take any more. The Ravagers were like nothing the galaxy had ever seen. They were part machine, part living horror, consuming everything in their path. They didn't negotiate, they didn't communicate. They just destroyed and moved on to the next world. The Velen Defense Fleet had tried to stop them. 20,000 ships designed for exploration and trade had faced the enemy at the border of their system. The battle lasted 6 hours. When it ended, only 12 Velen ships escaped. The Ravagers lost nothing. Now the monsters were here, at their homeworld. 4 of their 7 planets were already gone. Vela Prime had maybe 2 days left before the final assault began. 40 billion souls waited for death. Thess moved to the quantum transmitter, his 3-fingered hands shaking. The device was old technology, capable of sending messages across vast distances instantly. He had already sent pleas to every major civilization in the known galaxy. The responses had broken his heart. The Korthan Empire sent condolences, but explained they couldn't spare any ships. The Ravagers were too dangerous. The Ancient Syndicate offered to accept refugees, but only if the Velen paid an impossible price. The Galactic Council discussed the matter for hours before deciding that intervention would violate their non-interference protocols. Everyone had an excuse. Everyone had a reason to look away. Thess prepared one final message. His staff had found coordinates for one last civilization on the galactic rim. A young species, barely 20 years into space travel. They called themselves humans, and their world was named Earth. The Velen had never contacted them before. According to the database, Earth had no real military to speak of. They were primitive by galactic standards, but Thess was desperate. He activated the transmitter and spoke, knowing this was probably his people's last voice to the universe. This is Counselor Thess of Vela Prime. Our civilization is dying. The Ravagers have destroyed our worlds and killed billions of our people. We have asked for help from the great powers of the galaxy. No one will come. If anyone can hear this message, if anyone in the universe still believes in helping those who cannot help themselves, please, we are begging you. He attached footage of the attacks. Images of burning cities, fleeing civilians, the horrible Ravager ships tearing through their defenses like they were made of paper. Then he sent the message and sat down, exhausted. Thess didn't expect a response. He just wanted someone, anyone, to know that the Velen had existed, that they had been here. 6,000 light-years away, on a moon orbiting a blue-green planet, Commander Hyun received the transmission. Hyun was a career military officer who had spent 15 years building Earth's defense network. She was short and stocky with sharp eyes that missed nothing. She stood in the command center of Lunar Station 7, surrounded by screens and officers monitoring the quiet void of space. When the Velen message came through, the entire room went silent. They watched the footage 3 times. No one spoke. No one knew what to say. The images were horrifying. Cities that looked like works of art being torn apart. Civilians running in panic, their silver skin reflecting the flames. And those ships, those terrible Ravager ships that looked like metal bones covered in rotting flesh. Captain Yuna Lee stood beside Hyun. She was younger, a pilot who had flown an Earth's first contact mission with the Korthan 5 years ago. Her voice was quiet when she finally spoke. We barely have a fleet, Commander. We've got 32 warships. Most of them are still in trial phases. What can we possibly do against that? Hyun didn't answer immediately. She watched the footage again, focusing on a scene near the end. A Velen adult was holding 2 small children, trying to shield them from falling debris. The camera caught their faces for just a moment before the building collapsed. Call Admiral Taeho, Hyun said. Emergency session with the Coalition Council. We need to move fast. Commander, with respect, we can't fight this. Those are thousands of enemy ships. We'd be throwing our people away for nothing. Hyun turned to face her crew. Every person in that room was watching her, waiting to see what Earth would do. She thought about her grandfather, who had fought in the last war before Earth united. He used to tell her that courage wasn't about being strong enough to win, it was about being human enough to try. Get the council, Hyun repeated, and send a response to Vela Prime. Tell them Earth is coming. The room erupted in activity. Officers rushed to their stations. Communication channels opened. Someone asked what they should prepare. Everything, Hyun said. We prepare everything. The Coalition Council met in Geneva 4 hours later. Representatives from every nation on Earth, military commanders, scientists, and civilian leaders filled the chamber. Admiral Tae-ho Kim presented the situation in stark terms. The Velen were going to die. The Ravagers would then move on to consume more civilizations. Eventually, they might reach Earth. The debate was shorter than anyone expected. Earth was still new to the galactic community. They had been ignored, dismissed as primitives playing with technology they barely understood. Other species looked down on them. But in that chamber, humanity made a decision that would change everything. They voted unanimously to respond to the Velen plea. Admiral Tae-ho stood before the council and said words that would be remembered forever. We have a ship. It's experimental. It's dangerous. It might not even survive the journey, but it was built for this exact situation. We call it the Prometheus Protocol. Hyun watched from her seat as the Admiral explained. 15 years ago, when Earth first learned they weren't alone in the universe, a secret project had begun. They had built a weapon unlike anything the galaxy had seen. A ship designed not to explore or defend, but to fight with every ounce of human stubbornness and fury. It was called the Wildfire. Who will command it? Someone asked. Tae-ho looked around the room. I have someone in mind, someone crazy enough to make this work. On Vela Prime, Thes received Earth's response just as the sun set on what might be his world's last day. The message was short. We heard your plea. We are coming. Hold on. Thes read it twice, unable to believe what he was seeing. The humans were coming. The species that everyone dismissed as primitive and reckless was the only one willing to help. He walked to the window and looked up at the stars. Somewhere out there, humanity was preparing for war. Thes whispered a prayer to gods he wasn't sure existed anymore. Let them arrive in time. Please, let them arrive in time. The shipyard floated in the darkness beyond Neptune, hidden from Earth and from curious eyes in the galaxy. Admiral Tae-ho Kim stood in the observation deck, looking at the ship that might save humanity's reputation or destroy it entirely. The UESS Wildfire looked nothing like other spacecraft. Most ships in the galaxy were smooth and elegant, designed for efficiency and speed. The Wildfire was angular and brutal, covered in plates of experimental armor that looked like dragon scales. Its engines were massive, taking up nearly a third of the ship's length. Weapon ports lined every surface. It looked less like a vehicle and more like a flying fortress built by someone who expected to fight through hell itself. She's beautiful, said a voice behind him. Tae-ho turned to see Captain Junho Park entering the observation deck. Junho was in his early 40s, with a face that had seen too many battles and eyes that never quite stopped calculating. He had earned his reputation during the Mars Rebellion, where he had held a mining station against impossible odds for 3 weeks until reinforcements arrived. He was known for 2 things: never giving up and never following the rulebook when it got in his way. She's untested, Tae-ho replied. Every simulation we run gives her a 40% chance of tearing herself apart during combat maneuvers. Junho walked to the window, studying the ship. And the other 60%? She'll tear the enemy apart instead. A smile crossed Junho's face. When do I leave? Tae-ho handed him a data pad. You'll have 800 crew, all volunteers. They know the odds. They're coming anyway. Junho scrolled through the names, recognizing many of them. Engineers who had worked on impossible projects. Pilots who had survived situations that should have killed them. Marines who had trained for scenarios everyone hoped would never happen. And one name that surprised him. Dr. Mina Cho, The xenobiologist? Why is a civilian on this list? She insisted, Taiho said. Claims she needs to study the Ravagers up close to find their weaknesses. I tried to deny her request. She went over my head directly to the Coalition Council and made a speech about how science wins wars as much as weapons do. They approved her. Junho shook his head, but he was still smiling. This is going to be interesting. Over the next 48 hours, the Wildfire's crew assembled. They came from every continent on Earth, speaking different languages, but united by a simple idea. Someone needed help, and they were going to provide it. Chief Engineer Dae Song was one of the first to arrive. He was a genius with ship systems, capable of fixing problems that shouldn't be fixable. He had helped design the Wildfire's engines, and he knew their secrets better than anyone. When other engineers said something was impossible, Dae usually proved them wrong within an hour. Lieutenant Wu joined as tactical officer. He was young but brilliant, with a mind that saw patterns others missed. During training simulations, he had once defeated an entire enemy fleet using tactics so unconventional that the simulation designers thought the program had malfunctioned. It hadn't. Wu had just found a solution no one else would have considered. Sergeant Nari Choi led the Marine contingent. She was small but fierce, with a reputation for training the toughest soldiers in Earth's military. Her unit had won every combat simulation they entered. More importantly, they trusted her completely. When Nari said they were boarding enemy ships in the middle of a battle, her Marines didn't question it. They just checked their weapons and followed. Dr. Mina Cho was the last to board. She was carrying 3 cases of research equipment and wearing a smile that suggested she had just won an argument. When Junho met her at the airlock, she extended her hand. Captain Park, thank you for letting me come. I'm told I didn't have a choice, Junho replied, shaking her hand. You didn't, but I promise you won't regret it. The Ravagers are the most fascinating hostile species we've ever encountered. They adapt, they learn, they evolve during combat. Understanding them might be the only way to beat them. Junho led her through the ship, explaining the layout. The Wildfire was designed for one purpose: aggressive combat. Every system had been built with the idea of pushing limits. The engines could burn hotter than any other ships, but only for short periods. The armor converted incoming energy into power for the ship's weapons. Even the life support was minimalist, with more resources devoted to combat capability. It's not comfortable, Junho admitted as they walked through the narrow corridors. Comfort is for exploration vessels, Mina said. This ship is for winning. In the engine room, Dae was running final checks. The engines were his masterpiece, designed to violate several laws of physics that most species considered sacred. When Junho asked if they were ready, Dae just grinned. They're ready to either save the galaxy or blow us all to atoms. Won't know which until we fire them up. That's not reassuring. It's honest, though. On the bridge, Lieutenant Wu was reviewing tactical data about the Ravagers. The information was limited. Most species that fought them didn't survive to share intelligence. But what they knew was terrifying. The Ravagers had destroyed 12 civilizations in 50 years. They traveled in massive fleets. They never retreated. They had technology that seemed to combine biology and machines in ways that made no sense. Captain, we're outgunned, outmanned, and outexperienced, Wu said when Junho joined him. Our only advantage is that we're unpredictable. They've never fought humans before. They don't know what we're capable of. What are we capable of? Junho asked. Wu looked at him seriously. Anything necessary. Sergeant Nari had her Marines running drills in the ship's combat bay. They practiced boarding procedures, close-quarters combat, and emergency repairs. One Marine asked why they were training to board enemy ships when their job was to defend the Wildfire. Nari's answer was simple. Because the captain might order us to board them, and when he does, we'll be ready. 48 hours after assembly began, the Wildfire was ready to launch. Admiral Taiho gave Junho his final briefing in private. The trip will take 14 days using the slipstream drive. It's going to be rough on your crew. The Velans say they have maybe 3 days left before the Ravagers finish them. You'll be too late to stop the initial assault. But not too late to fight, Junho said. No, not too late for that. Taiho paused. The galaxy thinks we're children playing with fire, Junho. Show them what happens when children grow up. The launch was witnessed by millions across Earth. The wildfire's engines ignited, and the ship began to glow with heat. It didn't drift gracefully into space like other vessels. It roared forward like a bullet, leaving a trail of energy behind it. Inside, the crew felt the acceleration pressing them into their seats. This wasn't the gentle push of normal propulsion. This was raw power barely contained. Dr. Mina watched from her research station as the ship entered slipstream. Reality twisted around them, and space itself seemed to bend. She had read about this drive, but experiencing it was something else entirely. They were moving faster than light, tearing through the fabric of the universe itself. Day monitored the engines constantly. The heat was immense. The pressure was beyond anything they had tested, but the engines held. They screamed and rattled and threatened to explode, but they held. Lieutenant Wu spent the journey studying every scrap of data about the Ravagers. He filled notebooks with theories and tactics. When other officers asked what he was planning, he just said, "Options. We need as many options as possible." Sergeant Nari kept her Marines sharp. They drilled every day, even in the cramped quarters. They practiced until their movements were automatic, until they could function even when exhausted and terrified. Junho walked the ship each day, talking to his crew. He learned their names, their stories, their fears. These people had volunteered knowing they might not come home. He wanted to make sure that if they died, it would be while fighting alongside people they trusted. On the 10th day, Dr. Mina made a discovery. She had been analyzing the Ravager data, looking for patterns. She found something in their behavior that seemed almost like communication. "They're connected," she told Junho. "Some kind of quantum link. They share information instantly across their entire fleet. That's how they coordinate so perfectly. Can we disrupt it?" "Maybe. I'd need to study one of their ships up close." She looked at him hopefully. "Which means we'd need to capture one." Junho laughed despite himself. "You want us to capture a Ravager ship in the middle of a battle?" "Well, when you say it like that, it sounds difficult." On the 14th day, they emerged from slipstream at the edge of the Andorra system. The crew was exhausted from the journey, and the ship's systems were strained. But they had made it. Ahead of them lay Vela Prime, surrounded by a blockade of 200 Ravager ships. Junho stood on the bridge, looking at the enemy fleet. They were massive, each one a nightmare of metal and organic material fused together. They pulsed with unnatural light. "Signal from Vela Prime," Wu reported. "They're telling us to retreat. They say we can't win." Junho opened the communication channel himself. His voice was calm and clear. "We didn't come here to save you from the dark. We came to burn it away." The wildfire didn't slow down when it entered the combat zone. It accelerated. Captain Junho Park stood on the bridge, watching the Ravager blockade grow larger on the screens. 200 enemy ships surrounded Vela Prime like a noose. Each one was twice the size of the wildfire. They looked like someone had taken metal warships and fused them with rotting organic matter. Pieces of them moved and pulsed, as if they were alive. "Full combat status," Junho ordered. "Day, I need those engines at maximum." In the engine room, Chief Engineer Day Song pushed the controls forward. The wildfire's engines weren't like normal ship drives. They were built to burn hotter than any other vessel in the galaxy could survive. The heat was the point. It made them faster, more powerful, and completely insane. The engines roared to life, and the entire ship began to glow. From the outside, the wildfire looked like a small sun racing through space, trailing plasma behind it like a comet's tail. "Ravagers are moving to intercept," Lieutenant Wu reported from Tactical. 20 ships breaking from the blockade. They're targeting us." "Good," Junho said. "Let them come. Activate the reactive armor." The wildfire's hull began to shimmer. The armor wasn't designed to block attacks. It was designed to absorb them and convert the energy into power for the ship's weapons. Every shot that hit them would make them stronger. The first Ravager ship fired its main weapon, a disintegrator cannon that had vaporized entire dreadnoughts in previous battles. The beam of energy crossed space in an instant and struck the wildfire directly. The ship shuddered. The crew felt the impact, but the armor held, drinking in the energy and feeding it to the power grid. Energy levels at 130%, Wu called out. The armor is working. Return fire, Junho ordered. Main gun, full power. The wildfire's primary weapon was a magnetic accelerator, designed by humans who believed that sometimes the simplest solutions were the best. It launched tungsten rods at 40% light speed. No shields, no fancy energy weapons, just mass and velocity. The rod hit the Ravager ship and passed through it like it wasn't there. The enemy vessel didn't explode. It simply came apart, torn into pieces by the impact. Target destroyed, Wu said, his voice shocked. One shot. 19 more targets, Junho reminded him. Keep firing. What followed was 20 minutes of the most violent space combat Earth had ever seen. The Ravagers were experienced fighters. They had destroyed civilizations. They knew how to coordinate, how to surround and overwhelm enemies. They attacked from multiple angles, trying to catch the wildfire in crossfire. But Junho didn't fight like other captains. He fought like someone who had spent his entire career winning battles he shouldn't have survived. Hard turn, 30 degrees port, he ordered. All weapons, fire on my mark. The wildfire spun, its engines leaving a trail of superheated plasma. As it turned, every weapon port on its hull opened simultaneously. Missiles, railguns, energy cannons, and the main accelerator all fired at once. 3 Ravager ships exploded. 2 more lost propulsion and began to drift. They're adapting, Wu warned. Changing formation. They're trying to surround us. Let them get close, Junho said. Closer is better. Sergeant Nari Choi stood in the Marine Bay with her troops, feeling each impact as the ship took fire. The Marines were ready for deployment, but there was nowhere to deploy to yet. They just had to trust the captain knew what he was doing. One of her soldiers asked the question they were all thinking. Sergeant, are we going to win this? Nari checked her weapon and looked at her team. We're going to do something better. We're going to make them regret starting this fight. On the bridge, Day's voice came through the comm system. Captain, I've got an idea, but you're going to hate it. Tell me. If we vent plasma from the engines while we're surrounded, it'll create a cloud of superheated gas. Anything caught in it will burn. Will we burn too? Probably not. Maybe, I'd say 70% chance we're fine. Junho looked at Wu, who shrugged. Better odds than we've had all day. Do it, Junho ordered. The wildfire dove into the center of the enemy formation, exactly where the Ravagers wanted it. They closed in from all sides, preparing to fire in unison and end this fight. Then the wildfire vented its engines. A massive cloud of plasma erupted from the ship, expanding in all directions. The temperature was hot enough to melt metal instantly. 6 Ravager ships were caught directly in the cloud. Their hulls buckled and burned. Their organic parts boiled away. The wildfire emerged from the other side, damaged but still fighting. Dr. Plea, Mina Cho, had been watching the battle from her research station, analyzing every Ravager movement and attack pattern. She noticed something important. Captain, they're learning from us. Each attack they make is more coordinated than the last. They're sharing information about our tactics. How long until they figure us out? Minutes, maybe less. Then we need to capture one of their ships now. Nari, are your Marines ready? In the Marine Bay, Sergeant Nari grinned when she heard the order. Marines, we're going boarding. Seal your suits and check your weapons. Junho guided the wildfire toward a damaged Ravager vessel that was drifting away from the main battle. Wu, disable its weapons but keep it intact. The tactical officer fired precisely, taking out the enemy ship's gun ports without destroying the hull. The wildfire pulled alongside, and the Marines launched. Nari led her team through space, using maneuvering jets to cross the gap between ships. They landed on the Ravager hull and cut through with plasma torches. Inside was like nothing they had seen before. The corridors were organic, pulsing, and wet. The walls seemed to breathe. And there were defenders, biomechanical creatures that were part of the ship itself. Contact, one Marine shouted as the creatures attacked. The fighting was brutal and close. The Marines fired their weapons, cutting down the creatures, but more kept coming. Nari led them deeper into the ship, following Mina's instructions about where to find the ship's central control system. They fought through 3 corridors before reaching it. a massive chamber filled with organic technology and computing systems fused together. It was still active, still connected to the Ravager fleet. "Mina, we found it," Nari reported. "Perfect. I need you to plant this device on the central node, the big pulsing thing in the middle." "The thing that looks like it wants to eat us?" "That's the one." Nari's Marines provided covering fire while she ran forward and slammed the device onto the node. It activated immediately, and she felt something. A presence, vast and hungry, touching her mind for just a moment before the device cut the connection. "Got it. Extraction now." The Marines ran back through the ship, fighting every step. 2 of them were injured, but the team made it back to the wildfire. As soon as they were aboard, Junho pulled away from the Ravager ship. On her research station, Dr. Mina was receiving data from the device. Her eyes went wide. They're a hive mind. Every ship is connected to every other ship through a quantum network, and it all traces back to a central intelligence, a queen mind. It's on the largest ship at the center of their main fleet. "Can we kill it?" Junho asked. "If we could reach it, yes, but it's protected by over 2,000 ships. We'd never get close." The battle continued. The wildfire fought with everything it had. Lieutenant Wu developed a new tactic. He called it the chainsaw. The ship would spin while firing all weapons continuously, creating a rotating wall of destruction. It was effective but brutal on the ship's systems. "Hull breaches on decks 4, 7, and 9, Day reported. "Engines at 40% capacity. We can't keep this up much longer." Junho checked the tactical display. They had destroyed 173 Ravager ships. It seemed impossible, but the numbers didn't lie. 1 human ship had done what entire fleets couldn't. But there were still enemies remaining, and the wildfire was dying. "Wu, how many Ravagers left in the blockade?" 27, Captain." "Can we take them?" Wu hesitated. "Not with our current damage. We need to fall back. Make repairs." "The Velen don't have time for us to fall back." Day's voice came through again. "Captain, I can give you one more push from the engines. One final burst at maximum power. After that, we're going to need weeks of repair work." Junho looked around the bridge at his crew. They were exhausted, wounded, pushed beyond any reasonable limit. But none of them were suggesting they retreat. "One more push," Junho said. "Let's finish this." The wildfire's engines ignited one final time, burning so hot that the metal glowed white. The ship charged forward like an ancient warrior making a last stand. The remaining Ravager ships tried to stop it. They fired everything they had. The wildfire's armor absorbed what it could and tanked the rest. Hull plates buckled, systems failed, but the ship kept moving. Junho guided them through the enemy formation, firing at point-blank range. The wildfire wasn't just fighting anymore. It was brawling, using every trick and tactic they had learned. When missiles ran low, Wu released clouds of plasma as weapons. When enemies got too close, Junho rammed them. The ship's hull became a weapon itself. Finally, the last Ravager ship exploded and the blockade was broken. "Clear," Wu reported quietly. "The blockade is clear." On Vela Prime, 40 billion Velen watched as the burning human ship emerged victorious from a battle it should have lost. The wildfire was barely functional. Half its hull was breached. The engines were cooling rapidly, no longer able to burn. But it was still there, still flying, still protecting them. Counselor Thess sent a message to the human ship. "You have saved us. We can never repay this debt." Captain Junho Park, sitting in a damaged bridge surrounded by his wounded crew, sent back a simple reply. "The fight isn't over yet." The wildfire drifted in orbit around Vela Prime, looking more like a wreck than a warship. Emergency lights flickered through the breaches in its hull. Repair crews worked frantically to seal the damage, but everyone knew the truth. The ship wasn't going to fight again anytime soon. Captain Junho Park walked through the corridors, seeing the cost of their victory. Medical bays were full of wounded crew members. Engineers worked without sleep trying to keep critical systems online. The ship creaked and groaned, barely holding together. He reached the engine room and found Chief Engineer Dae Song sitting on the floor, his face covered in grease and exhaustion. "How bad is it?" Junho asked. Day looked up at him with hollow eyes. "The engines need complete rebuilding. Weeks of work in a proper shipyard, maybe months. Right now, they're at 30% capacity. We can barely maintain orbit. Can we run? Not fast enough to matter." Junho helped Day to his feet and continued to the bridge. Lieutenant Wu was still at his station, studying the tactical displays, even though his hands were shaking from fatigue. "The main Ravager fleet will be here in 72 hours, Wu reported. "They're coming with everything they have. Over 2,000 ships. We destroyed their blockade, and now they're angry. Can the Velen evacuate? Not enough ships, not enough time. Even if we helped, we'd only save a fraction of their population." Junho sat in his captain's chair and stared at the planet below. 40 billion souls down there, celebrating their rescue, not knowing that death was still coming for them. Dr. Mina Cho entered the bridge, carrying a datapad. She looked like she hadn't slept since they arrived, which was probably true. Her eyes were bright with discovery despite her exhaustion. "I've been analyzing the data from the Ravager ship we boarded," she said. "I understand how they work now. The Queen Mind controls everything. It's like a central processor for a galaxy-sized computer. Every Ravager ship, every creature, every weapon, they're all extensions of her intelligence." "Her?" Junho asked. "The Queen Mind identifies as female, according to the data patterns. She's ancient, Captain, thousands of years old. She's consumed 12 civilizations and absorbed their technology. She's become something beyond just biology or machines." "How do we kill her?" Mina set the datapad down on a console. "That's the problem. She's at the center of the fleet, protected by every ship they have. No conventional attack could reach her. Even if we had a full Earth fleet, we couldn't fight through 2,000 Ravager vessels." The bridge fell silent. Everyone understood what that meant. They had won a battle but couldn't win the war. Sergeant Nari Choi joined them, limping from an injury she hadn't told the medics about. "Captain, the Marines are ready for whatever you need. Just say the word." Junho looked at his senior staff. They were battered and exhausted, but none of them had given up. He called for an emergency meeting in the briefing room. 10 minutes later, Junho, Wu, Day, Mina, and Nari sat around a table in a room that had taken damage during the battle. One wall was covered by a temporary seal, and they could see the stars through the cracks. "We need options," Junho said. "Give me anything." "The wildfire can't fight again," Day said. "Not in its current condition. We need time we don't have." "The Velen fleet is destroyed," Wu added. "No one else in the galaxy is coming to help. We're alone." "Can we use the Ravager's network against them?" Junho asked Mina. "Possibly, but I'd need more time to develop a weapon, and we'd still need to get close to the Queen Mind to deploy it." Nari spoke quietly. "What about ramming them? One ship, full speed, right into the center of their fleet?" "At current engine capacity, we wouldn't generate enough impact," Day said. "They'd destroy us long before we reached the Queen Mind." Junho stood and walked to the damaged wall, looking out at space. He thought about his grandfather, about the Coalition Council, about Earth sending this ship knowing it might not return. He thought about the Velen down on the planet, and about the billions of people across the galaxy who would die if the Ravagers weren't stopped. An idea formed in his mind. It was insane. It was probably suicide. But it might work. "What if we overload the slipstream drive?" he asked. The room went completely silent. "Captain," Day said slowly, "if we overload the slipstream drive, it won't just destroy the ship. It'll tear a hole in space-time itself. Everything within 50,000 kilometers would be consumed by the rupture." "Including the Queen Mind?" "Including everything. The Queen Mind, her fleet, and us." Junho turned to face his crew. "Could we survive it? Any way at all?" Day shook his head. "Not in the center of the blast. Maybe if we evacuated most of the crew first, kept a skeleton team to guide the ship. But anyone still aboard when the drive overloads would die instantly." "How many people would we need to make it work?" "To fly the ship, operate weapons, and manually trigger the overload? Maybe 130 crew members, no less." Lieutenant Wu leaned forward. Captain, you're talking about turning the wildfire into a bomb. I'm talking about winning, Junho said. We can't beat 2,000 ships in combat, but we can take them with us. Mina looked at the data on her pad. If we destroyed the Queen Mind and a significant portion of the fleet, the remaining Ravagers would become mindless. Without central coordination, they'd be easy for other species to defeat. We could cripple them permanently. At the cost of this ship and everyone aboard, Nari said. Junho nodded. I know what I'm asking. I know how it sounds. But I need to know if it's possible. Day stood and walked to a display panel on the wall. He pulled up the engine schematics and started calculating. His fingers moved quickly over the controls, running simulations. Finally, he stepped back. It's possible, he said. We'd need to disable every safety protocol. I'd need to manually override the core limiters. The process would take about 5 minutes once we started. 5 minutes to guide the ship into the enemy fleet and trigger the overload. 5 minutes is enough, Junho said. Captain, Wu said carefully, you're talking about a suicide mission. I'm talking about the only mission that works. Everyone else in the galaxy looked away when the Velen called for help. Earth didn't. We came here to fight, and we're going to finish what we started. The room fell silent again. Each person at the table understood what was being proposed. The wildfire would make one final journey. It would fly into the heart of the Ravager fleet and detonate, taking the Queen Mind and thousands of enemy ships with it. And everyone aboard would die. I'll volunteer to trigger the overload, Day said quietly. I designed those engines. I should be the one to break them. I'll lead the bridge crew, Wu added. We'll need tactical coordination to get through their fleet. Nari looked at her hands. My Marines will defend the ship while we make the run. If the Ravagers board us, we'll hold them off. Mina smiled sadly. I came here to study the impossible. What's more impossible than this? I'm staying. Junho felt something break in his chest. These people were volunteering to die, and they were doing it without hesitation. We'll put it to a vote, he said. The entire crew. Anyone who wants to evacuate will evacuate. We'll keep volunteers only. And you, Captain? Nari asked. Are you evacuating? Junho looked at each of them. This is my ship, my mission. I'm seeing it through to the end. They held the vote 6 hours later. Junho explained the plan to the entire crew. He was honest about what it meant. This wasn't a battle they would survive. This was a choice to trade their lives for the survival of the Velen and the defeat of the Ravagers. He gave everyone the option to evacuate to Vela Prime. No shame, no judgment. They had already done more than anyone could ask. 800 crew members voted. 673 chose to evacuate. 127 voted to stay. Junho read through the list of volunteers. Engineers who couldn't bear to leave their ship. Pilots who wanted one more flight. Marines who had never left a mission unfinished. Scientists who wanted to see this through. Each one knew what they were choosing. The evacuations began immediately. Shuttles carried the majority of the crew down to Vela Prime, where the Velen welcomed them as heroes. The Velen offered medical care, shelter, everything they could provide. The crew remaining on the wildfire worked around the clock. Day and his engineers modified the slipstream drive, removing every safety measure, preparing it for overload. Wu planned the final flight path, calculating exactly how to penetrate the enemy fleet. Nari positioned her Marines at critical points throughout the ship. Dr. Mina prepared one final transmission, a complete record of everything they had learned about the Ravagers. She would broadcast it to Earth and every other species in the galaxy. If they died, their knowledge would survive. On the second day, Counselor Thess visited the wildfire. He begged Captain Junho to reconsider, to let his people die instead of the humans. Junho's response was simple. We didn't come here to watch you die. We came here to make sure you live. On the third day, the Ravager fleet arrived. The Ravager fleet emerged from slipstream like a plague descending on the galaxy. Over 2,000 ships appeared in the darkness of space, surrounding Vela Prime in a formation so vast it blocked out the stars. Each vessel pulsed with unnatural light, their hulls a nightmare fusion of metal and organic matter. On the surface of Vela Prime, 40 billion Velen looked up at the sky and saw death approaching. They had been saved once, but salvation couldn't come twice. They held their families close and waited for the end. Aboard the Wildfire, Captain Jun-Ho Park stood on the bridge with his skeleton crew of 127 souls. The ship was ready. The engines had been modified for overload. Every safety protocol had been disabled. They had one chance, and it required flying into the heart of that massive fleet. All crew, this is the captain, Jun-Ho spoke over the ship-wide communication. In a few minutes, we're going to do something that will seem impossible. We're going to fly through 2,000 enemy ships and reach their queen. We're going to end this war, and we're going to make sure the galaxy never forgets what happened here. He paused, looking at the faces on his bridge. Lieutenant Wu at Tactical, Chief Engineer Day monitoring the engines remotely, Dr. Mina at her research station, Sergeant Nari standing ready with her Marines. It's been an honor serving with all of you, Jun-Ho said. The honor was ours, Captain, Wu replied, and the rest of the crew echoed the sentiment. Jun-Ho opened a channel to Earth. He knew the message would take hours to arrive, but he needed to send it anyway. Admiral Tai-Ho, this is Captain Jun-Ho Park of the UESS Wildfire. We engaged the enemy and broke their blockade. We saved the Velen. But the main Ravager fleet has arrived with over 2,000 ships. We can't win a conventional battle, so we're trying something else. We're using the Prometheus Protocol's final contingency. By the time you receive this, the battle will be over. We held the line, Admiral. Tell Earth we held the line. He closed the channel and looked at his crew. Engage engines. Plot a course straight through their fleet to the center. Maximum speed. The Wildfire's damaged engines ignited one last time. The ship began to move forward, slowly at first, then faster. It glowed with heat as it accelerated, looking like a small star challenging an ocean of darkness. The Ravagers recognized the human ship immediately. They had lost nearly 200 vessels to this single enemy. Now they moved to destroy it completely. The entire fleet converged. Weapons charging. Energy signatures across the board, Wu reported. They're all targeting us. Good, Jun-Ho said. The more they focus on us, the less they're focusing on the planet. Mina, transmit all your research. Make sure Earth gets it. Dr. Mina activated her final data burst, sending everything she had learned about the Ravagers across the galaxy. The transmission would take time to reach other worlds, but it would arrive. Knowledge would survive even if they didn't. The first wave of Ravager fire struck the Wildfire. The reactive armor absorbed what it could, but there were too many attacks. Hull plates buckled. Systems failed. Fires erupted throughout the ship. Hull breaches on multiple decks, Day reported from the engine room. But the engines are holding. Keep going. Captain? Jun-Ho guided the ship deeper into the enemy formation. The Wildfire wasn't dodging or maneuvering anymore. It was just pushing forward with pure determination. When enemies blocked their path, Jun-Ho rammed through them. The ship's hull became a weapon, smashing aside smaller Ravager vessels. I've got visual on the Queen Mind, Wu said. Center of the formation, 300 kilometers. On the main screen, they could see it. The Queen Mind's ship was massive, 10 times larger than any other Ravager vessel. It pulsed with bioluminescent light, and they could feel something, a presence, vast and hungry, pressing against their minds. Dr. Mina gasped. She's trying to communicate. She wants to know why we're doing this. Tell her, Jun-Ho said, that some species don't abandon others to die. The Wildfire continued forward. Sergeant Nari and her Marines fought off Ravager boarding attempts, holding critical corridors. The enemy was trying to stop them from the inside, but the Marines refused to yield. They knew their mission. They held their ground. 200 kilometers, Wu counted down. Engines are critical. Hull integrity at 20%. In the engine room, Day stood before the slipstream drive core. His hands moved across the controls, beginning the overload sequence. The core began to whine, a sound that grew louder with each passing second. Reality itself started to bend around the ship. Overload initiated, Day announced. 5 minutes until detonation. The Wildfire pushed through another wave of enemy ships. They were so close now. The Queen Mind's vessel filled their entire view. It was firing everything it had, trying to stop them. But the human ship kept coming. 100 kilometers, Wu said. On Vela Prime, Counselor Thess and billions of his people watched the battle on their displays. They saw the small human ship, burning and breaking, pushing through an impossible fleet. They saw it moving closer and closer to the enemy's heart. Tears fell from Thess's eyes. They're not running. They're not retreating. They're going to... He couldn't finish the sentence. 50 kilometers, Wu reported. His voice was steady despite everything. Captain, we're not going to make it to contact range. They're going to destroy us before we reach the Queen Mind. Junho looked at the tactical display. Wu was right. The damage was too severe. They'd be torn apart in the next 30 seconds. Day, Junho called to engineering. Can we trigger the overload early? At this range, we might not take out the entire fleet, but we'll get the Queen Mind and at least 1,000 ships around her. That'll be enough. Do it. In the engine room, Day accelerated the overload sequence. The slipstream drive began to scream. The sound was beyond mechanical failure. It was the sound of space-time itself being torn apart. 30 seconds, Day announced. He looked around the engine room at his fellow engineers. They had given everything to keep this ship flying. Now they'd give one last thing. It's been an honor, everyone. On the bridge, Lieutenant Wu left his station and stood beside Captain Junho. Sir, permission to say it's been a privilege serving under your command. Permission granted, Junho said with a small smile. And Wu? You're the best tactical officer I've ever known. Dr. Mina finished her final calculations and looked up at the screen. The Queen Mind's ship was so close she could see details on its hull. She had come to study the impossible. She had succeeded. Sergeant Nari and her Marines held their positions throughout the ship, even as it broke apart around them. When one Marine asked if they had won, Nari's response was simple. Look at where we are. Look at what we're about to do. We've already won. The Ravagers realized too late what was happening. The Queen Mind, ancient and powerful, finally understood these humans were not trying to win a battle. They were trying to end a war. She sent one final transmission, not in language but in pure emotion. It was a question. Why? Captain Junho Park answered, speaking the words into the void even knowing she would hear them. Because someone asked for help. That's all we needed. The slipstream drive reached critical mass. For a single moment, the wildfire was the brightest thing in the system. It outshone the sun. It was beautiful and terrible, a star born from human determination and sacrifice. Then it detonated. Space-time ruptured. A singularity formed, brief but catastrophic, consuming everything within 50,000 kilometers. The Queen Mind's ship disintegrated first, torn apart at the quantum level. The Ravager vessels closest to the blast tried to escape, but there was nowhere to run from a hole in reality itself. In seconds, 2,000 ships vanished. The shockwave spread outward, not as destruction but as a wall of electromagnetic energy. It reached Vela Prime minutes later, washing over the planet like an aurora, beautiful and harmless. On the surface, 40 billion Velen watched the sky light up in colors they had never seen. They watched the enemy fleet disappear. They watched the darkness burn away. And they understood what it had cost. Counselor Thess fell to his knees, looking up at the display of light. 127 humans had just traded their lives to save a species they had only known for days. Remember them, Thess whispered. By all the stars, we will remember them. Across the galaxy, the remaining Ravager ships, those not caught in the blast, suddenly went silent. Without the Queen Mind's coordination, they drifted aimlessly. Species that had fled from the Ravagers for generations now moved against them. The mindless ships were destroyed within weeks. The threat that had consumed 12 civilizations was ended by one ship and 127 souls who refused to look away. On Earth 3 weeks later, Admiral Taiho Kim stood before a memorial in Geneva. It was a wall of black stone, and carved into it were 127 names. Captain Junho Park, Chief Engineer Dae Song, Lieutenant Wu, Sergeant Nari Choi, Dr. Mina Cho, and 122 others. Commander Hyun, now promoted to Admiral, spoke at the dedication ceremony. She told the story of the wildfire, how it was built, how it fought, how it ended a war. "We are not the strongest species in the galaxy," she said to the assembled crowd. "We are not the wisest. We are not the oldest. But when someone cries for help in the darkness, we are the ones who answer. And if necessary, we will burn down the night itself to bring them light." The speech was broadcast across the galaxy. Every species heard it. Many were moved. Some were inspired. A few were afraid. The Galactic Council formally recognized Earth as a full member. Trade agreements followed, technology exchanges, alliances. Earth was no longer dismissed as primitive. They were respected, sometimes feared, but always remembered. On Vela Prime, the Velen built their own memorial. In the center of their largest city, they constructed an eternal flame. It burned day and night, maintained by volunteers from every generation. They called it the human fire, and they swore it would never go out. Carved into the stone around the flame, in both Velen and human languages, was a single promise. When the Ravagers came, the galaxy turned away. But humanity heard our plea and sent a ship of myth and flames. Parents brought their children to see it. Teachers told the story in schools. Artists created works inspired by it. The tale of the wildfire became legend, passed down through generations. And in the darkness of space, where the wildfire had made its final stand, there was a phenomenon that scientists couldn't fully explain. A permanent shimmer in space-time, like a scar in reality itself. Some called it the wildfire echo. It glowed faintly, a reminder of what had happened there. A reminder that 127 humans had looked at impossible odds and chosen to fight anyway. Ships passing through the region reported seeing strange readings on their sensors. Some pilots swore they heard voices on dead frequencies, speaking words of courage and determination. The scientists said it was just residual energy from the slipstream detonation. But the poets and the dreamers knew better. They knew it was the sound of humanity's promise, echoing across the stars forever. "We hear you. We're coming. And we will not let you face the darkness alone."